Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us on this Thursday afternoon. We'll just give it a few moments for everyone to get logged in. I have a few notes for you all. But first, I'd like to welcome you to our Baptist Behavioral Health Grand Rounds. We thank you for joining us. I'm Dr. Francesca Barello-Sims, the Director of Education and Training for Baptist and Wolfson Children's Behavioral Health. Before we begin, a few notes on today's presentation. If you have any questions, just submit those into the Q&A box or the chat. And at this time, if you have logged in through a mobile device that doesn't show your name, please do add your name and credential and license number. I'm happy to introduce Kirsten Freitag Murray. She began her career as a Title I public school teacher in Elkhart, Indiana. She was co-directed at the Lancaster, PA Mother Center, served as a lactation consultant, led a family life education department that provided evidence-based parenting support through 13 school districts, and most recently served as Director of Development and Public Relations at Creative Health Services. Ms. Freitag Murray is the new Executive Director of Hope Street Incorporated, a trauma-informed care training agency grounded in trust-based relational interventions, or TBRI, that you guys will learn about today. TBRI is a whole child attachment-based, trauma-informed, evidence-based, multi-systemic, and developmentally respectful program designed to meet the complex needs of vulnerable children and families. This was developed by Drs. Karen Purvis and David Cross at the Karen Purvis Institute for Child Development at Texas Christian University. In this role, she also serves as the servant leader of Hope and Healing Jacks, bringing together those already working in Jacksonville to address adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, and trauma to promote healing and build resilience. Welcome, Kirsten.
Thank you. Thanks so much. It's wonderful to be here on definitely a beautiful Thursday afternoon, and I'm very excited to share this with everyone. I appreciate your time and, of course, your interest in hearing more about this. And as Dr. Sims said, at Hope Street, we really work to equip all adults who touch the lives of children with what they need so that they can give children what they need. And I know that everyone is serving in different roles who's on this webinar today. But all of these principles that we'll talk about concerning trauma and building trusting relationships and connection really apply to all the relationships that we have. So I'm hoping that you'll find this informative, and it will encourage you to think a little bit more about this and look more deeply into this. So at Why Hope Street, we provide trust-based relational intervention, which is a universal intervention. So it's really strength-based, evidence-based delivery of service to adults. So we don't deliver service to kids. And I just want to say that at the outset. So when we think about Hope Street, we think about the things that are going on in our community, and really trauma that goes unresolved is the issue. We all experience trauma in our lives, and it's just when it gets unresolved or gets pushed to the side that's when there's interference with trust and relationships. And so this is a perspective shift. It's a change in how we look at things. And I'm guessing that you've heard this phrase, we're changing the mindset from what's the matter with you to what happened in your story. And when do we say things like, what's the matter with you? Well, you think back to your days in the classroom as a student and the teacher saying, what's the matter with you, Billy? Why are you doing this? Why can't you sit in your seat? Or, maybe someone who comes to see you through your practice. And then just changing the lens to what's happened in your story or what is happening. So we want to explore pathways to resolving that trauma, because we can't prevent trauma from happening, and then developing everyday trauma-informed responses and connections that strengthen both individual and community resilience. So at Hope Street, we work on a model of TBRI practitioners who received their training actually from the developers through Texas Christian University. And what we do is we are very respectful of meeting people where they are. So if adults, let's say parents, biological, adoptive, or foster parents are having trouble connecting with their children, then we want to meet those folks where they are. We want to look at the strengths that those parents have, because every person has strengths. We need to see those strengths. We need to help draw those out and develop those. And then we want to, as practitioners, develop relationships with participants of felt safety, and then share really scientific knowledge around biology and neuroscience. And the beautiful thing around that is we're learning new things every day, as you know, providing a safe space for changing mindsets and behaviors, and then offering new skills and strategies and creating a place to process those and practice those, which, as we know, is super important to take the learning to that level. And then this is a beautiful visual of, we want to stay calm, we want to show up regulated ourselves, we want to see the need. Behavior is communication. So what's going on behind that behavior? What's that child saying? Meet the need. So we have some figuring out to do, and then don't quit. But that also means there are other people in the game in terms of meeting the need of these children and parents. So in terms of trauma, some of you are going to be very familiar with dealing with physical trauma on a daily basis. And so here, of course, we're talking about psychological trauma. And trauma is simply something that we have to experience or do experience one time or many times that outstrips our ability to cope. That's really it. And so keeping that in mind, we're going to watch a short animate that really will I know that you've heard about and learned about adverse childhood experiences. This gives a really nice overview, and then we'll talk a little bit more about the perspective taking.
A child's experiences early in life are important building blocks for the developing brain. Genes, nature, are like the blueprint. They provide the basic framework for brain development. However, genes do not design the brain completely. Environmental influences, nurture, fine-tune how the brain works by shaping which brain connections get used. Connections that are used more grow stronger and more permanent, whereas ones that do not get much use fade away. Together, genes and the environment build the foundation for all future development. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships early in life lead to healthy development. But children's brains capture other experiences as well. Stressful events. However, not all stress is bad. Positive stress involves normal childhood experiences, like starting daycare or meeting a new person for the first time. This stress is essential for healthy development because it helps children develop coping skills and confidence. But when stress is frequent, chronic, and uncontrolled, it is toxic to children, especially when they do not have a caregiver to provide support or buffer the stress. Adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, such as abuse, neglect, exposure to intimate partner violence, parental depression or addiction, and poverty, are toxic stressors which could lead to lifelong changes in learning and behavior. ACEs early in development can impact social, emotional, and cognitive functioning, increased risk-taking behaviors such as drinking and substance use, and increased risk of disease, disability, and social problems later in life. The question is, how do adverse childhood experiences impact a lifelong development? One of the most important systems in our body is our stress system. It's activated when we experience stress. We become alert, our heart rate increases, and so do our stress hormone levels, cortisol and adrenaline. Our body is ready to react, what is known as fight or flight. A short period of time after the stress is over, or if a child receives support from a caregiver, the stress response turns off and the body returns to a normal state. Adverse childhood experiences create stress responses that stay active, and without the support of a caregiver, the system has difficulty shutting off completely. This constant and prolonged activation can affect immune system functioning and increase the chances of sickness, infection, and disease. Prolonged activation of stress hormones is also toxic to the brain. Certain areas of the brain are more vulnerable to toxic stress, including the executive center or the brain's control center, an area important for solving complex problems, attention, reasoning, impulsivity, inhibition, and learning. A second area is the emotional center, the brain's alarm system, which is involved in processing and interpreting emotions and the ability to control impulses. The third area is the memory and learning center, the brain's filing cabinet, which plays a major role in learning and the formation and retrieval of memories. Science shows that adverse childhood experiences impact all of these brain centers. Behaviorally, what we begin to see is emotional distress, poor emotion regulation, greater impulsivity, learning difficulties, and physical and mental health problems. More recently, science has begun to look at how ACEs cause changes in gene expression through a process called epigenetics, which helps us understand how nature and nurture interact. Epigenetics causes changes in the way genes work without changing the DNA code itself. This occurs through chemical changes influencing how the code is used. In other words, genes are like the hardware in a computer. They determine the boundaries of what is possible. However, we need an operating system to tell the hardware what to do. Epigenetics is like the operating system directing the function of a gene's DNA hardware. The genes we are born with are the genes that we have for life, but experiences like nutrition, exercise, smoking, stressors, and relationships all affect our biology. Adverse childhood experiences are associated with epigenetic changes related to stress, brain development, cognition, and systems associated with mental and physical health. Changes that happen early in brain development are more likely to be enduring and are possibly passed on to future generations as well. The good news is that positive, supportive relationships at any stage in life can make a difference. However, supporting families and children early on will help prevent many of these negative outcomes. One of the key ingredients for healthy development is having warm, loving, and actively engaged caregivers. This involves promoting serve and return interactions, where caregivers actively and warmly engage with the child, making eye contact, responding to sounds, words, gestures, emotional needs, and sharing experiences like reading and play. Providing programs that support caregivers to strengthen these abilities are the blocks that build healthy foundations for life.
So that really wraps things up in a nutshell. And that really leads us into the findings of the study that was done by Kaiser Permanente and the CDC over 20 years ago. And the three broad categories of adverse childhood experiences are abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction. And the way that we have started to talk about it is abuse is, these are what we'll call sins of commission, and neglect, sins of omission. And then household dysfunction, these are things that were identified as a parent or caregiver having a mental illness, and especially if untreated, so a caregiver or loved one who's incarcerated, and then witnessing domestic violence. Now this infographic says mother, but of course, if the father is treated violently as well in intimate partner abuse, that is has the same effects. Substance abuse issues, and then divorce. And the reason for that is, as a young child, their whole construct is built around that, their family system. And that's being changed dramatically. So when we look at these, and there have been expansions on adverse childhood experiences, things like living in foster care, experiencing bullying, living with neighborhood violence, poverty. So there have been things added, but this was the initial study, and that didn't even really take into account things like poverty, because this was done with 17,000 middle class, mostly white folks in middle America. So the work has continued on with this. And just in terms of ACEs, some of these things can happen to children, and we'll talk about sibling groups right here. You can have the same thing happen within a family to two siblings, but the results are going to be different, or maybe 6 siblings. The results are going to be different because each person is born with their own temperament, and each person has different responses to stress and trauma. So just in my own story, I've got 2 biological sisters, and over time had 9 foster siblings in the home. And my mom did have a mental illness that was not treated at all. And so given those factors, when you look at the outcomes in the 12 now children who grew up in that household, there are very, very different outcomes, sadly, with 2 dying at a very young age, but taking different paths, making different choices, some doing their work on resolving the trauma. So it's very important to know that it's what we do with the trauma, and also these trusting relationships that do or do not exist when trauma occurs. So at Hope Street, again, just to clarify, we are addressing the effects of early adversity and relational trauma through the connecting, empowering, and correcting principles of trust-based relational intervention. And if you go to our website that was our new website that was launched yesterday, you're going to be able to go to a page and see an outline of our trainings. We have them broken into modules. And so it's very exciting to be able to have this available to you. And we do have funding relationships that allow community participants, including you, to go to that website to register, take part in these trainings through the generosity of some of our funding partners. And so when we look to, let's go back to this. This is a nice short video here.
TBRI,
on TBRI.
trust-based relational intervention, has at its core building a trusting relationship. It has 3 sets of principles, and they look at the child as a whole. When you think about development, the baby cries and I say, yes, I will comfort you. And so this child learns that they have a voice. They learn trust, which is the lesson of the first year of life. I can trust. There are so many children from hard places. And for those children, their capacity to trust has been fiercely damaged. The brain chemistry of a child who cries and no one comes is dramatically altered. The child with a history of trauma or loss or abuse has no hope of healing without a nurturing relationship. In every way that I make time and space, that I give touch, eye contact, and I give words, I am going to empower this child to go back to the beginning of what he or she should have experienced in the arms of a loving parent that said, when you cry, I will come. The phenomenal thing about a trust-based intervention is, as we connect to this child, as we build safety, we actually change the brain chemistry. We change the wiring of the brain. This is really the heart and soul of all that we are and all that we do. Do I look into the child's eyes? Do I touch their arm when I talk to them? When they talk to me, do I stop what I'm doing and talk to them? This is the essence of mindfulness. The excitatory chemicals about I'm afraid, I'm hungry, I'm cold, but those are balanced when the caregiver comes and gives warmth. All regulation occurs first with an external regulator. So in the beginning, I regulate all. They're cold, I bring warmth. They're crying, I bring myself. And out of my regulation, their brain develops capacity for self-regulation. If this child didn't have this experience, that child doesn't feel safe. This chemistry can be altered, first by knowing they're safe, second by nutrient-rich foods, third by my environmental regulation of that child's emotion, and fourth by appropriate exercise. So we can balance brain chemistry by creating a holistic environment. We clearly have to deal with behavior. Correcting means showing a child the right behavior, praising him when he gets it, and showing it to him until he can get it right, and showing him with no fear and no shame, so that he builds success, not a greater sense of failure. So the message of hope for our families is that we can help our children to dramatic levels of healing. We simply have to be devoted to it and be willing to invest what it's going to take.
So that really points us to the foundational piece of TBRI, and that is attachment. And so attachment is not something that happens immediately at birth. It's something that happens over time, hundreds and hundreds and thousands of opportunities to listen to that communication from your little one. And, you know, it's either they're crying and we have to figure out, are you hungry? Are you wet? Are you stuck? And then responding, and it happens over and over and over again, or it doesn't happen. And so when that serve and return doesn't happen and that response doesn't happen, then as we all understand, that child learns, I'm not important. My needs aren't going to be met. And so that is a break in healthy development. So in terms of looking at attachment, if that hasn't happened in the first 3 years, and that's what we know from the neuroscience and biology and longitudinal studies in terms of attachment, if those needs aren't met, there is a way to have a redo. But there has to be knowledge around the fact that this didn't happen. And then we have to come alongside and offer this redo. Maybe even when a child is 16 years old, maybe that's the first time there's an adult in their life who's willing and able to engage in that attachment cycle with them. So when we look at the ideal setting, some children are born into the ideal setting, not all for sure. And so when we think of that, we think of things like having a primary caregiver who is going to be responsive to your needs, like feeding me when I'm hungry and changing my diaper when I'm wet, but also loving me and holding me, because a child from 0 to 3 has absolutely no ability whatsoever to regulate. They need their primary caregiver and loving adults to regulate for them. And so that's what happens when we pick a baby up and, you know, we're just rocking back and forth. We are offering that regulation because that baby has no skills in that way. We're teaching, we're demonstrating what that looks like. And then after the age of 3, if they've gotten what they need, then they can move to this co-regulation state, which actually goes all the way until about the age of 25 for females and around the early 30s for males. This is what we know from brain science. And at that time of adulthood, that's when we can expect people to regulate on their own or to self-regulate. But kids are practicing from the age of 3 to the time that their prefrontal cortex is fully developed. They're practicing self-regulation, and that's the beautiful part of being the adult who can be around. So a good thing to think about, and some perspective taking here in terms of children who are in your practice, and maybe you have young adults who are parenting, and you can see behaviors that are just showing you that, yeah, some needs aren't being met. There are behaviors going on that this individual is saying, something's not right here, I need help. And so thinking about the experiences that those individuals have had. And here's the honest truth. Sometimes we're in situations with colleagues even, and we're just feeling like, I'm having a hard time relating to this colleague. And what is it? What's happening? So just being a little introspective here and saying, what am I bringing from my own history that's making me have these feelings about interacting with this individual? Doesn't have to be someone in your that you're serving in your practice. So that brings us to a really important point, is that we can't really do anything for those we serve. And we can relate this to parenting as well. If you are a parent, we can't really be there to help regulate for our little one or co-regulate with our 3 to 25 or 30-year-old if we ourselves don't come into the picture regulated. So, so just taking some perspective taking there. We're going to see a short piece on the actual brain
Early
development
trauma
here.
in whatever form can alter the way the brain develops and trigger changes in neurotransmitters that drive our central nervous system. Neurotransmitters are chemical messengers that tell our hearts to beat, our lungs to breathe, and our limbs to move. They also play a vital role in our moods, memory, even our ability to cope with stress. In children from hard places, key neurotransmitter systems can be altered in potentially harmful ways, causing behavior to spiral out of control.
When you finish.
And cripple a child's ability to learn and grow.
We know that if dopamine is too high or too low, we don't get good learning. We don't get good memory. We don't get clear thinking. They help me, honey. It is hard. Too high or too low. We get aggression, violence, acting out, thinking disorders, mood disorders, schizophrenic-like behaviors, autistic-like behaviors. They have neurochemically their fingers in an electric socket. A child who has changes in his brain and his brain chemistry from early trauma won't just automatically heal. They need insightful, precise, skillful parenting.
May I have a hug? Oh, I love you. They need to be parented more like a toddler or even an infant in terms of how we are kind of on them all the time or with them all the time.
Research has shown that children from hard places can be developmentally less than half their chronological age. So a child who's 8 may act more like a 3 or 4-year-old. A 6-year-old may act more like a 2.5 or 3-year-old.
One of the greatest gifts that I would give a parent if I had the capacity was the compassion that comes with deep insight. If I look at my child's behavior compassionately, I still have to deal with it, but I can deal with it properly because I realize where that behavior was coming from. I have never seen a child that couldn't come to dramatic levels of healing, but we have to know how to guide them.
So I want to take us back to the infographic on ACEs and just call out the fact that in that study, it was found that the more of those experiences, adverse experiences that were had by a child, they add up, and you have long-term physical and behavioral health outcomes that are simply not good if those things go unaddressed. So, and just also thinking back to the video that we just looked at, I want you to think about the physical posture of the adults in that. And so it was a beautiful example of that co-regulation and sometimes other regulation, even though, you know, the little, one of the little girls was maybe 8 or 9 years old, but still needed that other regulation. So sitting on the floor, holding gently, you know, not really restraining, but holding gently, using a calm voice, showing up as the regulated adult. And the phrase that I've always liked to use is, we're the climate control, right? It's really up to us. And this can apply again to young adults in your practice as well. So then we'll just quickly look at this. So the first 3 years are really vital in terms of attachment, as we know. And so on the left-hand side of the screen, this is, you know, a normal slide of a brain of a normal 3-year-old child who has received the input and the love and the response necessary. And so it's not just about behavioral development, it is actual physical brain development. And then on the right-hand side is the slide of a 3-year-old who has experienced extreme neglect. So that brain development just isn't happening. And these are things you know, but I think this picture stays with us, right? This is something that can stay with us and help us come back to the fact when we're seeing a behavior that seems really over the top and out of order. And maybe you've got a young parent in your room or in your office, and you know, they've got their child with them because there was no one to watch their child when they came to their appointment, and you're seeing over the top behavior, and you're seeing a parent who doesn't really know how to respond in the situation. You know, this is a moment where you, as the trusted messenger, have this beautiful opportunity to show up calmly regulated and speak into the situation. So then what are some of the risks? We've talked about the abuse, neglect, and household dysfunction, the overarching trauma, which can be acute, complex, collective. It can be a one-time situation. Perhaps a family lived through a house fire, losing their home in a fire. So there are one-time things that can happen that really alter a person and their ability to respond. And so we also look at things like maternal depression. There are lots of peer-reviewed studies that we know the effects of this. And a difficult pregnancy or birth that can have very long-term effects, as we know. And also possibly something we don't normally think about, but is absolutely true and makes sense, and I'm sure is applicable to some of you on this webinar, a NICU stay and possibly other early hospitalization. As we know, that really can affect maternal depression as well, and which can also play into just the lack of opportunity for the normal serve and return that goes on when you bring a newborn home from the hospital. So these can interfere with that can interfere with the attachment cycle. So these are things that we can also keep top of mind. We've talked a lot about the external regulation, co-regulation, self-regulation, and the goal, of course, is self-regulation. Now, if we look at a 5-year-old and think, well, you're acting out, you're really getting under my skin. There are lots of different ways that we feel about this and say this. You're pushing my buttons. Why don't you act your age? Well, actually, the 5-year-old is probably acting their age. So that also brings us back to thinking about what has this child and or their parent experienced. What have they had the opportunity to work on and work through in terms of the trauma they've experienced? And then are we at a place with, let's just take the 8-year-old example, are we at a place with this 8-year-old and their caregivers that they need some redos in terms of attachment and understanding? So just really, and going back to infancy, when someone says, oh yeah, this 6-month-old needs to learn how to go to sleep, well, then that's our job to teach them how they go to sleep, because they don't have that ability. So we need to teach them how to self-soothe, and we need to have ways to help them learn how to do that. And then just knowing we have this big period of time, whatever role we're playing with a child, that we're co-regulators with them, but we can't possibly be co-regulators. We can't be external regulators unless we come regulated ourselves. And so that means we have to deal with our own stuff, to put it really scientifically. And then at its root, the ability to learn self-regulation by adulthood requires trustworthy and empathic caregivers. So this is a great visual too. And this is, let's say we're on a ship. We wouldn't be around an iceberg in a small boat, but we're coming up on this beautiful, massive iceberg. What we know, if we've done our homework before we went on this, let's say Alaskan cruise, is that what's underneath the water is just exponentially larger than what we can see. So when we look at this visual, we see we're calling the part of the iceberg that's above the water behaviors, right? And so what's underneath the water, what's causing the behaviors that we can see, are the brain, the body, the beliefs, and the biology that have been affected by trauma. And we're talking about trauma that has at this point been unresolved. So we're talking about things like the slide we looked at. Actual brain development hasn't happened appropriately. And as you get into adulthood, that could mean that you're going to have health issues, behavioral health or physical health issues. And it is going to impact your caregiving abilities. And then when we talk about the body, if we have become accustomed to being in the mode of protecting ourselves, then and because we don't have trust for those around us, we're not sure our needs are going to be met, well, then we're going to have different responses, right? We're going to have physical responses to that. And then just beliefs about the world, about ourselves, about how others are feeling toward us, whether it's true or not, these beliefs reside in us based on what we've experienced and what we've received along the attachment cycle. And then in terms of biology, we all know that this goes to gene expression. And of course, it goes to just our physical and behavioral health. So then we move to the 3 pillars of trauma-wise care. And first of all, we talk about felt safety a lot, which really has nothing to do with being physically safe or being in a physically safe environment. It has to do with my internal self. It has to do with really feeling internally that all is well. Things are going well. I'm in a good spot. I don't feel like there are any predators around me, so to speak. There's nothing I have to fear. And so that's really an important distinction, because a child can be in a physically safe environment, but not have felt safety. And then connection has to do with trusting relationships, because that's how we operate in the world. And as we know, we are basically wired for contact and belonging, and that goes to connection. So, and then of course, self-regulation is that adulthood goal that we're all working along. And then this is thinking about looking at those behaviors. So we can think about the iceberg here as well. And we can think about switching our lens from what in the world is wrong with you to what happened to you. So power struggles are a huge issue. And so when we start to engage in a power struggle, and whether it be with someone that you're serving and you're trying to talk about, yeah, I think this might be a good idea. At the end, there's we talk a little bit about COVID vaccination resistance, because that's still an issue right now in Duval County. You know, the cases are, we're doing pretty well right now in this moment. But there are times where you're trying to talk to someone whom you're serving, and you want to, you're encouraging them, right? You think it's best that they do something. And you could get into a power struggle with someone that you're serving. But of course, we can think of situations like this from our own lives, that we as children were in power struggles with adults who we felt like didn't understand us, or this has happened as parents and caregivers ourselves. So when the power struggle ensues, the child is going to put up greater resistance. The adult gets more frustrated. Then we have oppositional behavior, and then the parent or the caregiver or the physician or the therapist wants to put down some more rules. And then we see behaviors that result in social problems. And that just keeps spiraling down. So that's when we have the lens of, you're disobeying me, you're not listening to me, and you're pushing my buttons, you're getting under my skin, right? And then if we flip that lens and we look at some of the pushback as, okay, I see this. This is a survival skill. This is how this child has made it to 8 years old, right? And then we take away the lens of, you're doing this so that I'll go back to teaching second grade. You are engaging in these behaviors so that we can't possibly get through these lessons, or we're not going to have specials today because of your behavior. So what happens when we change that lens and look at what the behavior as a survival skill? We can engage in an upward spiral. We can start seeing better cooperation, which is absolutely the goal in all of our relationships. And so the child learns that I can use my words to tell you, this doesn't feel right to me. I want to do something different. Could I do my homework after I play outside? The adult is giving voice by listening. And then the child is becoming more aware of, oh, I want to do this other thing first, or I want to tell you how I'm feeling about this. And then compassion and understanding on the adult side is validation of feelings, right? And then the child has greater awareness. The adult has greater awareness. And then there's reduced frustration, increased cooperation. And that's our goal when we're thinking across all relationships in your practice and in your homes as well. So when we consider challenging behaviors by children, by people who look like adults but are stuck, right? Stuck back in their developmental process. So maybe they're back at 8 years old, even though this is a 26-year-old. So we want to be mindful of their developmental age, their chronological age. And then a lot, we talked about a child who's experienced trauma that's gone unresolved. Let's say they're 12 years old. They may act developmentally like a 6-year-old, but they may have the street smarts of a 21-year-old. So we need to take all that into consideration. Those are survival skills. And then we want to consider behaviors as a survival response. And then, and this, you might think, well, this should be at the top, but this is really foundational. Calm yourself before you calm the child or whomever you're interacting with. And then this just talks about, brain development. And again, the end goal is that prefrontal cortex, which happens at adulthood, which we now know is around 25 for females, around the early 30s for males. And we do know that that is not a hard and fast number and depends on a lot of things. So I mentioned you as the trusted messenger, and I'm guessing you've heard that. So this is just appealing to when you're working with individuals who are parents and you're in a situation, and maybe they're not parents. Maybe you're dealing with someone who's stuck back developmentally, and these are ways that you can engage with those you are working with who have experienced trauma, who have been marginalized, and who have felt that they have not had a voice and maybe not had a voice, but ways that you can engage that show this humble approach and show respect for the fact that you've experienced these things in your life, and maybe you haven't had the opportunity to resolve these things. That's really, so these are just some suggestions. And then this is from a piece that I wrote with a colleague. And then these are more suggestions that lead to the center, which is hope-centered care seeks to understand how strengths developed in the midst of adversity. And when we think of it that way, we really do have to give a lot of credit to those whom we serve, who we may get frustrated with because we're seeing these behaviors that, are irritating. They stand in the way of moving forward. They stand in the way of their health. And so we change our lens in that way and come up with this approach that puts them in a place of strength. And then these are just questions, and you'll have access to this. I know we're going through this quickly, but we want to leave some time at the end for Q&A. These are just some ways to approach this that can maybe allow them to feel that, okay, I'm in a place where I feel safe. And then we just want to talk about the few things around the health and health disparities and health equity. And really the bottom line, as you know, is there has been a lot of fear. There is a lot of fear sometimes around simply going to see the doctor or see a therapist, because someone who's experienced trauma has also experienced difficulty navigating systems. And you all know you're in a very large system, and it can be a frustration for you. And so imagine what that's like for someone who maybe they went to the doctor one time and possibly an investigation was opened on their family. Like, these are realities. Or someone who's coming to see you and you want to encourage them to trust in this system. And we're using this as an example, the COVID vaccination and boosters, because there is mistrust around that, and that can be from systems mistrust. It can be just from a bad experience, a traumatic experience with someone who's been involved in the system as well. So we talk about cultural competence as opposed to cultural humility. So we can know things intellectually, but then moving them to the practice of humility. So again, taking your lens on each individual and just thinking, what did happen in your story and what is happening in your story? And then this just specifically leads us to why there has been hesitancy, and pointing to you as the trusted messenger, which is really a special spot that you have. And that builds over time, that trust builds over time. And there are things that you can say that folks that you serve may not even accept hearing from those in their family. And then the structural barriers that need to be addressed just to improve this. And again, right now, things are going pretty well around COVID, but of course, you know, RSV and the flu, those are really big issues right now. So this is a nice little graphic that is taken from the healthcare toolbox. So you all know the ABCs, and then we move to the DEFs as you're in your practice and you're doing mental health screenings and just thinking through these other factors. And then the one thing that does come up quite often is this frustration around screenings and questions, but then the feeling from those being served that, well, then that just sits there. Like, so that's something that has come up as I have presented this. So I think that's fair to bring that up now. And then these are just things to delve into. The top two are focused on pediatric care, but that doesn't mean that that's limited to, that these concepts are limited to that. And then again, just a reminder. And then before we go to Q&A, if this is honestly takes less than 1 minute and is for our funders, it won't be shared out with anyone else. This is just a way that we are able to offer these types of things to the community, and which we are so just so honored to be able to do.
Thank you so much, Kirsten. We really appreciate it. So we do have a few questions, and before I pose those to you, I'm going to share my screen now so that I can pull up a couple of the QR codes for our folks who are on the line seeking credit. So this is how you all will get that, depending on your discipline. So go ahead and scan those. As a reminder, links to these evaluations are always sent to those who formally registered to your email, and I will also pop those in the chat too. So for our first question, can TBRI be used for adults as well, or is it strictly for youth?
Absolutely fabulous question. So we only deliver these trainings to adults, and the very first thing that you do when you come to a training is learn about attachment and tap into traumas that you may have experienced that have gone unresolved. So the initial step is to resolve and do your own work, because as I said, we can't show up for kids if we're not showing up whole ourselves.
Yeah, 100%. Like the comment that you made about making sure you're regulated, calm yourself before you calm the child. So that these practices really could go for all. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
One, attendee noted, do you think we can provide this information to teachers and school administrators? And, is there potential benefit because we see a lot of school violence? It's very present right now, especially University of, in Virginia. So
Yeah.
with that recent situation.
Yeah, very top of mind. That is a fabulous question. And that is part of our work. So for pre-planning days in Duval County Public Schools, one of the largest school systems in the United States, we trained 500 teachers and 200 guidance counselors and social workers. And we are at varying levels. So some got an hour overview, some got 2 hours, some got 6 hours, some are going through 18 hours of training. And then we provide ongoing coaching. We go into the classroom and give feedback after folks have been through TBRI training. That's just this fall. So if you go to our website, you're going to see that at this point, since 2019, Hope Street has affected the lives of 40,000 children through our work in schools here in Jacksonville, and also providing TBRI training for those especially involved in child welfare. So that is a great question. It is happening now. And that is, that is why we're continuously seeking funding to offer that. And so that's a great question, and it is being done, and it's very important.
That's really great to hear. Thank you. Any specific co-regulation strategies from TBRI that you find would be helpful for providers working with patients in a medical setting? We have quite a few, medical professionals on the call. So how does that intersect?
So I think I'm gonna assume we're talking about serving adults in this situation. And so one thing that I find really helpful and that does work with adults is, let's make sure that you're hydrated. And this is really a serious thing, like grab a bottle of water and just sit down in close proximity. We all know that, but if we come to this regulated, that's really the biggest piece. So respecting personal space, but coming close enough that it's like, I care enough to sit down and listen to you, and provide the opportunity just to be in that space together. You can ask questions, but sometimes feeling heard or knowing that someone's creating space for you is enough for someone to come back to see you again. But it's really staying calm. It's eye contact. It's dropping your eyes when you know that it's just not sustainable for that person with what they're going through. Handing a tissue, just creating this very calm space is really the best thing that you can do. Now, are there other things? Absolutely, but that's in the moment. In the moment responding. And let's say someone came into your office and this has happened, right? They throw their bag down, maybe kick their bag, to just kind of overlook that. You're not condoning it, but it's like, that's the behavior, and you want to look to the heart of things.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And it's hard to do because a lot of the populations that our providers work with present with some of those, like, oppositional and potentially aggressive behavior sometimes. And
so
it's hard,
scary.
To not react right away.
Yeah,
right?
you're scared. And then also really being mindful of what your triggers are, knowing what you have in your history, that you bring with you every day, that that you're more sensitive to certain behaviors. And so just being really mindful of that, and being able to have some self-talk in place to at least cool down while you're with that person. You may need to do some more cooling down work later, but also having a trusted colleague that you can talk about these things with.
Absolutely. Another question, would you say that TBRI is more of an adjustment to perspective or lifestyle change for the adult or for the child in cases with pediatrics?
Yeah, it's definitely, the work is on the part of the adult. Absolutely. And it's our job, as I say, to be climate control, because we can't say how the child is going to react. And it might take a much longer time for one child than another, because again, you could have two siblings in the same family experiencing the same thing, but this child is wired to fight and this child is wired for flight. And this child had over here had another adult in their life that was there and creating trusted connection. So there are so many variables. We can't put a time frame on anything, but it really is the work of the adult.
Mhm. Well, point taken. Uh, So one more question, and then we have from Carol. Is there any areas of research in particular, whether that be TBRI or just trauma-informed care in general, that you feel really require more attention? What's missing right now from the literature?
There's so much going on with the brain science. There's a lot going on in attachment. There's a lot going on just in family relationships. I mean, there is a lot of really good work going on. If you go to our website, I have a very large resource section, you know, Bruce Perry, Dan Siegel, Ken Ginsberg, Sandy Bloom, Nadine Burke Harris is the Surgeon General of California now, very foundational in this work. So the work is going on. I think the issue is getting it out as common knowledge. Look at how long ago the ACEs study took place. I will say this, I think the messaging around positive childhood experiences is really taking off, and I'm very happy about that. Everyone in the field is happy about that. So not just focusing on the adverse, but the focus on these relational, the trauma happens within relationships. Trauma can only be healed in relationship.
Mhm.
And so just looking at, there's a PACES connection that you can simply sign up and join. You get a news feed that's a great news feed every day. Scroll through, see what you want to read, delete, whatever. But I think you'd be surprised at the research that is going on, and just leaps and bounds in terms of this field. The issue is getting the word out.
Yep, for sure. Well, that's what you're doing today, so thank you. And so from Carol Visconti, is there a training opportunity for providers as a common thread she's hearing during her evaluations, the desire to seek a trauma training? And before you give an answer about definitely what TBRI offers, as a hospital system, we are making efforts to, you know, inform in collaboration with Hope Street Incorporated during onboardings and just other supplemental trainings and Cornerstone, so that all employees, not just, you know, therapeutic providers, can be exposed to some of the teachings of trauma-informed care. But please share, you know, what trainings are offered.
Yeah, so that's a great question. So through our funders, and we are able to offer trainings both virtually and in person in Jacksonville. So you'll just need to go to our website. You'll go to the training outlines and then the calendar. You click on what you want to attend. You set up an account on Collaboration. This is through Kids Hope Alliance, and they take care of the registration, and then we offer the training. Now, as the hand was tipped to this, we are collaborating to bring about something very exciting to Baptist Health. And but in the meantime, you can certainly go to our website and access that training. There are it's very resource rich. Dr. Andrews was on an expert panel with us in September at the screening of Hiding in Plain Sight, Teen Mental Health, which I highly recommend. If you have not watched those 4 hours, you really need to watch those 4 hours with your Passport account through JCT. Just anything that we can gain around how kids are feeling right now in terms of their behavioral health. And then also definitely by you filling out this tiny little survey today, which couldn't be tinier, this allows us to show our funders, yes, we're doing this, we're making a difference. And then that allows us to do this more broadly. but you definitely could sign up today. Go. Yeah, we would love it. And then we have other agencies that fill out a form and ask for training, you know, at their entity, but we already have that in the works with Baptist Health.
We're so fortunate for your partnership. Thank you so much. Apologies to those, you know, that we were over by 5 minutes, but you know, it's a great topic, so I couldn't stop the train of discussion. For anyone who's interested in getting the slides, and eventually I will, you know, generate the link of the recording, please email behavioralhealtheducation@bmcjax.com and we will get that to you. Okay. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank you, Kirsten and Hope Street. We will resume our Grand Round series in January in the new year. So see you all hopefully in 2023. Have a wonderful weekend and holiday season. Thank you, Kirsten. Bye-bye.
Yep. Happy Thanksgiving. Thanks for having me.